morning.
I'll move these out of your
My
way.
mic is up. Good morning.
We're going to primary.
I'm just waiting for a go
Pick a
sign.
different issue, pick a different community to kick.
Whoop. Let's see, we got to get mic'd properly.
Oh.
Okay,
You're good.
I'm good? All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Kate Ellis. I'm the president and CEO of GLAAD. And this is our second affiliate panel here in the Ice Village. So was anybody here for last year's? Oh, good, good. And everybody else is a newbie, huh? Well, welcome. We have a lot to discuss, so I'm going to get right to it. This panel is actually corporate allyship in a fractured world, which GLAAD organized with Accenture, Deutsche Bank, Edelman, HRC, and PGLE. GLAAD's work on LGBTQ issues works with global leaders, corporations, Hollywood, tech, and all forms of media. We also work with faith leaders. Most recently, we sat down with Pope Francis in advance of his statement that being LGBTQ is not a crime and that criminalization laws are unjust. We also worked with him on the same-sex blessings. Where we're seeing quite a bit of backlash now, aren't we, in Africa and the US. In Davos this year, I've noticed two trends that I'm sure some of you might have noticed as well. One is what this panel is not, and that is AI. We're not talking about AI. The hyperness around AI that's been around for over a decade is very interesting. That's a whole other panel. The second pattern is how to navigate this fractured world, especially LGBTQ inclusion. Businesses have questions, and I hope this panel will provide some much needed answers. Last night was the second year that GLAAD and Accenture's Beck Bailey, the co-chair of the PGLE, organized a rainbow light up of the promenade. It's the second year we lit the promenade up in rainbow. Even with the potential of backlash for LGBTQ inclusion, led by a small group of organized anti-LGBTQ activists, we saw over 20 venues and companies participate here last night, and that grew year over year. I just want to reinforce for you how significant this is and this allyship is, because within hours of the start of the light up, news broke yesterday that lawmakers in Florida, back in the United States, introduced a new bill that would ban pride flags from public buildings. That's in the United States of America, just yesterday, as we were lighting up the promenade here. And Claire, the activist from Uganda, who we were here with, mentioned to me how safe she felt on the promenade last night than in her own country. That's the power of visibility, and that is the power of civil society organizations working with global businesses and leaders. Not only here in Davos, though, but around the world and around the year. It can't just be talk here. We have to move it to action. GLAAD, Open for Business, and HRC all work with corporates to ensure allyship and inclusion. We're your resources to navigate the fractured world. At GLAAD, we're doing this with over 200 companies. Last Pride Month, when two major brands faced loud backlash from a very small number of organized anti-LGBTQ activists, we set up a rapid response task force to reach out to companies being targeted. After the two companies made headlines at the top of Pride Month, not one other did for the rest of Pride Month. And that was working behind the scenes to ensure that this didn't happen to other companies. Then, at the end of the month, we released a solidarity statement with our partners HRC, then with more than 60 companies signing. We can create these coalitions, and there's been a lot of talk about the need for coalitions. That's been a topic that I've been hearing all week. Can't go it alone right now, and we have to be united. And we can work with you on quiet diplomacy, because we've seen a lot of that happening now too. Allyship is not just about values. It is about growing the bottom line. Let's be frank. I mean, we're in a capitalist society, especially in the United States. And this, we know inclusion is a business forward idea and need in order to grow your business. So now I have the honor of introducing Dominic Arnell, the CEO of Open for Business, to share brand new research that makes the case for the bottom line. Dominic?
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to really thank GLAAD, actually, for giving some of their space up today. It's really what this sector should be about, and I feel like you've really role modeled that, so thank you. This report is the Investor's Guide to LGBTQ plus inclusion. My name's Dominic Arnell. I'm the Chief Executive of Open for Business. So Open for Business bring the power of the business community behind the global LGBTQ community. And we do that by making the economic case for LGBTQ plus inclusion. And this isn't to replace the human rights case or anything like that, but we think that organizations, countries should be aware of the full spectrum of benefits from engaging with our community. And also, if countries implement laws that harm our community, they should be aware of the full spectrum of consequences. So we lead a coalition of 36 global businesses, all of whom have made a commitment to drive change. We run programs in East Africa, the Caribbean, Central and Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. And finally, we develop research aimed at creating systemic change for LGBTQ plus people. And we hope that this report falls into that last category. So we've been lucky that our work has been used all over the world, which is fantastic. I've lost my slides. There we are. And it will continue to be. We want to be useful to civil society. We want to be useful to business in making the case for LGBTQ people. So the purpose of this report that I'm talking about today was to explore the correlation between LGBTQ transparency and profitability. Those of you that are familiar with our work know that this isn't exactly a new thread for us, but we think it's very, very important. We also wanted to examine the integration of LGBTQ inclusion within ESG strategies, and finally, to provide a framework for investors to evaluate businesses on LGBTQ plus inclusion. So we looked with a really in-depth analysis at 290 companies. So this was the FTSE 100, the Fortune 100, the ASX 50, and the DAX 40 in Germany. We looked at all sorts of different report types, so ESG reports, impact reports, annual reports, and materiality assessments. And of the 290 companies we analysed, the following were top 5 by country in terms of an LGBTQ transparency score. Each company was assigned this transparency score based on 13 separate data categories, which included points around the existence of network groups, public advocacy, spend with LGBTQ-owned businesses, etc. And these were the findings. So the most important finding for me is that the top 25 in terms of LGBTQ transparency were 2.3 times as profitable as the bottom 25 in that list. So forget about go woke, go broke. We've all seen the headlines. It isn't true. It's never been true, and it's still not true. The second one is that DEI isn't dead. ESG isn't dead. 92% of the companies we looked at listed DEI as a material issue for their business. And I think while young people overwhelmingly say that they want to work in an inclusive environment, this isn't going anywhere. Thirdly, global LGBTQ consumer spend power is growing. As you can see, it's larger than some of the largest economies in the world. So this is going to continue to be a massive issue for business. A majority of companies, and this was a surprise to us, have actually moved beyond a baseline position on ESG inclusion now. So a baseline would be aligned with your materiality assessments and a focus on disclosure, metrics, and targets. We actually saw some really, really creative ways businesses were engaging with the topic. And then finally, we've seen an increasing focus on ESG and trans inclusion, which is wonderful news. Absolutely the number one thing that businesses were doing was providing full healthcare to trans employees. So these are the strategic imperatives for investors that we've come up with. So number one, Emphasize inclusion in investment decisions. LGBTQ plus inclusion should be a fundamental parameter in investment decisions, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it makes sense. Secondly, engage in constructive dialogue. Our report features 9 key questions that you can ask to make sure that the business that you're engaging with is LGBTQ plus inclusive. And finally, dearie me. I've lost my slide. Finally, advocate for enhanced ESG standards. Investors have a unique positioning in power, so please do make your voice heard. Folks, thank you. That's a very complicated report in 5 minutes, but it's been wonderful talking to you. And next up, I'd like to welcome the president of HRC, Kelly Robinson.
Cool. Thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Kelly Robinson. I'm the president of the Human Rights Campaign. I use she, her pronouns. I'm so proud to be here at Davos. I do have to say, this is my very first Davos experience, and I feel like I'm constantly catching my breath.
Yes.
And I mean that because of the hills, right, and the altitude. But I also mean that because of the power that exists in rooms like this when we come together. You know, as Sarah Kate said, as Dominic indicated, we are living in an extremely fractured world right now. But it's also a world that demands us to answer the challenge in front of us right now. And as I've talked to business leaders all across the world this week and in the work that we do at the Human Rights Campaign, it's clear that they're not backing down from this challenge. Instead, they're actually stepping up. You know, and it's not just because it's the right thing to do, although I believe that it is, but it's because that they know that the risk of not doing it is a risk of not future-proofing their organization for the world as it is and as it will be. When we talk about the lesbian, gay, bi, queer, and trans community across the world, we're talking about a community with $5 trillion of consumer power. We're talking about a community that is 800 million people across the world. We're talking about a community where 1 in 4 of Generation Z identifies as a member of a part of. This is an important and critical moment for businesses to continue stepping up. And even though the public dialogue is shifting and is changing and there are constant threats to ESG and DEI and every other acronym you can think of, right? We are still seeing record numbers of participation and allyship from corporations. You know, at the Human Rights Campaign, we are the largest LGBTQ organization in the United States, and we've been doing a program called the Corporate Equality Index for the last 20 years. It is the benchmarking tool for corporations to really show that they are in allyship with the community. And this year, we had record participation. Nearly 1,200 businesses participated, representing 39 million employees around the world. Again, this is an effort that has momentum, but we've got to continue to give businesses the tools that they need to actually bridge the gap. Because what we're finding is that there's a strong emphasis and need to be a part of this work, but there's also an allyship gap. And by that I mean, when I talk about being an ally, I'm talking about something that's an action that you're able to do every day, that you can implement through the tools and systems of your organization. Now, we know that businesses have a driving need to be an ally to our community, but oftentimes there's a gap. There's a gap between where they are and where they intend to be and where they actually want to be. And our job is to give them tools to bridge that gap. So enter. Is there a drum roll function in this room? There is. So please enter the Corporate Citizenship Report. This is the first ever report of its kind that we've done at the Human Rights Campaign. And it's really meant to be a roadmap to help companies and businesses get from where they are to where they want to be in terms of allyship. Now, this report actually covers 6 different areas of your business to make sure that you've got the tools to do the work in every aspect. And what we really want to be thinking about is, in this moment, when we talk about being an ally, when we talk about LGBTQ plus equality, we're not just talking about your internal processes. We're not just talking about the best practices within your organization, although those things are very important. We're talking about implementing this in every single aspect of your business, from supply chain, to products and services, to marketing, to workforce, of course, to advocacy and political engagement, corporate philanthropy, and more. This is meant to be that tool to help folks to bridge the gap. So I will say, we're in snowy Davos here. I also grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Chicago, so I'm not afraid of snow. But my mom used to always say, it's easier to walk backwards in the snow than forward, right? Because you've got the footprints to follow. This is meant to help us to find that path forward when there's not an obvious place in front of us, when the road actually hasn't been created yet. This is that tool that's going to help people to bridge the gap in a concrete way and to measure the outcomes in getting there. So we're super excited to release this report. We hope that folks will download the QR code to make sure that you can be on the initial release list when we release it next week. So thank you all so much for being here, and I'll hand the mic back to Sarah Kate, or to Ina, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Ina Fried, Chief Technology Correspondent at Axios, and I'm so glad we're having this panel. I'd like to invite, actually, the panelists, come on up, take a seat wherever. I want to pick up on a couple things that I heard from both Sarah Kate and Kelly, that we are in this, incredibly important moment. The threats are urgent, but we have seen a path where companies can do it right, and we've seen it go really badly. We've seen some of the biggest brands in America really step in it because they didn't take a stand. They didn't have a value and say, sorry, this is who we are. Love it or leave it. They waffled, and they ended up pleasing no one. And I heard this amazing story. I was on the shuttle, which, by the way, the best thing in Davos, ride the shuttle, meet interesting people. I met an LGBTQ person from Israel who was telling me this story of this Palestinian tahini maker that took a stand, put their LGBT support on the product. Some imams in some small towns banned it, but it's become the leading tahini brand, I believe. Fact check me, I don't know the details. But it's become, it's fueled their success throughout the region. I'm gonna go look it up and buy it. I don't care what it costs to have that shipped. So I think there's a way to do it and a way not to do it, and we have seen both in spades. I want to pick up with where you started, Dominic. I mean, you've done a lot of work in identifying specifics. You have, I think, a Open for Business report that outlines 27 propositions across 3 pillars. Help explain. Don't go through all 27. We want to get to a lot of stuff, but explain the why. Why is this approach the right way to go?
Well, I think it's the right approach for a number of reasons. I won't do the 27, but I'll do the 3 categories that they fall into. So we know that LGBT inclusion has a real impact on the individual. This is the stuff we've been saying for years. People perform better when they're able to be themselves, etc. We know that for a business, LGBT inclusion has a really, really positive environment, not just on your LGBTQ employees. Women tend to perform better in LGBTQ inclusive environments, whether they're LGBTQ or not. Which I think is really interesting. And then the third level is a societal level. So countries that are more LGBT inclusive tend to attract higher levels of direct foreign investment, for example. They tend to be more competitive, more creative. Global business is more likely to headquarter there. I promised I wouldn't list them and look at me go. But there's basically all sorts of reasons. And for the exact same reasons that LGBTQ inclusion is important for businesses, it's the same reason it's important for individuals, same reason it's important for societies.
And for everyone, I wanna take a quick moment to say, what do the rainbow lights on the promenade mean, and what do we need? Because my sense is it's incredible. It matters. It raises a conversation because those rainbow lights are reflecting on the pavilions of countries where it's not legal to be LGBTQ. That's the power, clearly. But in this moment where it's great to be a supporter of your LGBTQ employees. But, for example, I just saw Apple told a bunch of its employees in San Diego, if they want to keep their jobs, they have to move to Austin. And it just, my stomach sank for the women, for the members of the LGBT community, what kind of a choice you're forcing them to make. So I want to talk about, what do we need the other 364 days a year to be a true ally, not just in terms of your workforce, in terms of your political action, et cetera? I don't know, Sarah Kate, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think to go back to your to where you started, right, which was about those maybe 3 companies who did it wrong. And stole all the headlines. I think there's false narratives around there, and I think now we've got to disprove those narratives, which is now falls on us, and I think is a really interesting situation that we're in. But I want to really set the record straight. Those 3 companies, those 3 American companies, actually walked back from their values and didn't stand with their values. The other you can't, there were hundreds. There was over 300 companies that participated in Pride in the United States, and a big portion of them were challenged by these anti-LGBTQ activists, and they stood their ground and they went away. And so I think to answer your second question, which is there are some bullies out there right now, and they're trying to bully corporates. And they're trying to use LGBTQ people as a political football as opposed to human beings. And we're the casualty out of that. Our kids, our youth, we're seeing higher and record numbers of suicide rates among LGBTQ youths. And that's because of this cultural backlash that we're seeing. But I also want to keep it in perspective for business leaders in this room and abroad that it is a very small group of people, and they're using their social media in an outsized way to create a tremendous amount of noise. And so what we need, corporates, the number one thing is to stand strong and call us. We're your allies. We are here to help you navigate this. All of us up here work together on a daily basis, and we're getting on the phone together to help corporates manage this and work through it, because you cannot build a business for tomorrow without the LGBTQ community. And we're here to help you do that.
And that's a perfect transition, Marco, at Accenture. I mean, you guys have been leaders in this. Other companies, I think, aspire to do the work, but it's hard to know where to start. Talk about how you've helped Accenture get where it is. It seems easy, but it's not. I know it takes a lot of hard work. What are the key ingredients to get to where a company like Accenture is?
Yeah, just look at my gray hair, so you know how that journey has been. But super happy to be here. By the way, this is my first Davos, and I'm loving it. And I do want to respond quickly. How did I feel last night? Because as a first time in Davos, and as a chief of staff of our CEO and chair, it's a special treatment as well to be here. Even though I'm blessed to be here because. And she sends her regards. And I said, I need to do this. I want to do this panel. She's in another panel with Sam Altman. I wanted to see that as well, but you'll see it on the recording. Anyway, so I felt, first of all, as part of Accenture, I felt very proud to see the big Great Ascent sign in front of the building. But it was a feeling of, and I came here as a little guy. I grew up in Germany. Now I live in the US, half of my life already. And the promenade was beautiful. So it was a feeling of warmth, comfort, but also a statement that we made. And I looked around and looked at the people, and they all were observing. I mean, they were waiting in line to get into parties and things, but people, it was very observing. If somebody missed it, then it's a whole other topic, if somebody missed it. So from an Accenture perspective, it has been a long journey. But a few things that I want to say that we've gotten to, out of 700 and something thousand employees that we have around the world, we have about 120,000 LGBTQ plus, we call it Pride in Accenture, ERG members, which is members of the community, LGBTQ plus community, but also allies. Everybody wears a Pride lanyard. We wear the colors. Julie Sweet, our CEO, our whole executive management committee on calls, you see us with a lanyard. And that is something that took us about 10 years to get to. But you go around the world, 56 countries that we're active in, you see people in all sorts of countries. Now, there's a few countries we're working on to get there still, but we see the colors. So there is the sense of internal belongings. Yes, we have where it's legally we have the benefits and everything in place, but we're really pivoting to showing demonstratively with the colors of the support internally. So externally, we also, and we're going to get into this one a little bit later, we're starting to pivoting, particularly myself, now I call it now a seat at the table, because I'm the chief of staff of the CEO, to really make a point about working with our external community, all of us here on stage, and I know Gilead, we just talked about getting into that as well, and would like to share a few things later, but we really have gotten into the mindset of creating the colors around the lanyard to be that single point of connection across about 120,000 people that wear this every day.
And Kelly, I want to dive into, HRC's done a number of things over the years, but I want to dive into two specific initiatives. One is the Corporate Equality Index. And one of the smartest thing that you and your predecessors, I think, have done is it's not a static thing. what it took to get a perfect score last year or the year before isn't the same as this year. And that's so important because, once upon a time, just a statement in your corporate policy that you don't discriminate was enough to get a pretty good score. And it's clear that that isn't enough today. Talk about how the bar does move and what it takes to be an ally. And then I do want to unfortunately get into the second thing you did, which was to declare a state of emergency in the US. But let's start with the Corporate Equality Index and the positive gains that have really been made. I've seen so much of what's the norm and what's the aspiration change because of that.
Absolutely. So we've been doing the Corporate Equality Index for 2 decades, 20 years. And not only has the bar for corporations kind of been leveled up each and every year, but the needs of our communities have changed, right? And the threats that we're facing externally have as well. So this has been an evolving tool that we have a business advisory council that helps us to kind of craft in a way. And then it gives us the ability to kind of coach companies and partner with them to figure out how you can actually get there, how you can meet the needs of your staff and employees around the world. And for us, when we started the Corporate Equality Index, we had about 100 participants. I think 13 of them got 100. This year, we had over 1,200 participants and nearly 500 got 100 on the CEI. That's the kind of growth that we want to see. And the goal of this tool is not necessarily to be punitive, but to help people understand what it actually looks like to support your employees and give you a marker, help you to measure yourself across your industry and across your peers in a way that you can level up. So it has really been a powerful tool, not only to kind of meet the moment, but to help, again, to draw that path for folks that do want to be not just good, but great for our community.
And we'll come back to the other. I think we'll stick on the positive for a moment before I get to the state of emergency. But there's real importance and value, I think, to what you've done there. Alex, Gilead obviously makes HIV medication that is used tremendously by our community, by large segments of our community. You as a company have used the fact that you engage in a business way with the community to advocate, not just in the US where, we're going to talk about things aren't great, but where there's a different level of acceptance than people that are taking your medicines elsewhere. Talk about the responsibility you feel in protecting your client base and the opportunity you have to advocate and how you've used that.
Yeah, no, thank you. For those of you that may not know, Gilead Sciences, we are an HIV company for the past 35 years. Probably the standard of care on HIV is probably an HIV-related treatment. And by the way, I always say this because I will say this until I can't say it anymore, but we're working on a cure. And it's there's a cure program with our clinical scientists that's not early lab. It's actually being in clinical studies with patients. So that's exciting. If we're not going to get there, it won't be through lack of trying. But stating that, you can have a cure, you can have the perfect treatment, you can have the perfect prevention tool, but unless you can get that to the people that need it, that cure will only be a benefit for the privileged kind of members of the community that live in places like Switzerland and the UK and parts of the US, because there are parts of the US that are very underprivileged and challenged as well in terms of treatment. So we realized quite early on, it's not about us having great science, or even it's not about us only partnering with the HIV community. We need to go beyond that, because if a member of the LGBTQ community self-stigmatizes, or their surroundings where they live, their religion is causing them to think twice before they think about looking after their health or getting an HIV test, we are not going to be able to do our job. So a lot of our health equity and philanthropy, we've actually focused on the LGBTQ community and Black and Latinx communities, which are also disproportionately impacted by HIV. So we realized quite early on that you can't just focus on the science, you can't just focus on partnering with the HIV community. And actually, two of our great partners are here on the stage with Kelly and Sarah Kate. And you're going to handhold us through this election year, because it's my first, I moved to the US from London 2 years ago, so it's my first election year in the US. I will need a lot of help.
And we're going to get to that. We're
Yes.
going to get to the role that companies play
Yeah.
in politics.
Yes.
And I actually want to set the stage with that with you, Kelly. So I am our brief moment of optimism to this really critical moment. And I want to start with just personally, it was so powerful to me when HRC came out and said that, because for so many of us in the community, as a trans woman,
Right.
it is hard to wake up every day, go to work, do my job, and everyone is like, it's normal. It is not normal. It is not okay. And talk about why you made the decision and what the response has been.
Yeah, so last year we declared a state of emergency in the United States for LGBTQ plus people. And it was in response to over 600 anti-LGBTQ plus bills that had been introduced, and 80 of which that were signed into law. But for me, it wasn't only the bills. It was that we had another deadly year for trans lives. It was that 1 in 5 of every hate crime was motivated by anti-LGBTQ plus bias. It was because people were showing up with AR-15s at the places that we shop and that we work and at pediatricians' offices. This is a world that we're living in the United States. And I also think, especially being here at this global forum, a lot of what's happening in the United States is not special or unique to us. In fact, some of the things that we are seeing play out across the world, including the horrific policies in Uganda that criminalize LGBTQ plus people, have been baked in the United States. So it was so critical for us to name it for what it was. And I also think the last thing I'll say is that I want folks to remember that it hasn't always been this way, especially in the United States. There was a moment where it felt like equality and our path to it was inevitable, right? But something in the last 3 years dramatically shifted in the laws, in the rhetoric, in the violence, the political violence and otherwise that we are seeing. So it was so important to name this for what it is, to call it a state of emergency and start to partner with folks, especially our business allies, to do something about it.
So we've hinted at this, and now I want to get really your advice, each of you, because you're so wise on how companies can use their power. It is choosing moments to speak out. It is quiet diplomacy. I think of how many of these laws might have been prevented if the biggest companies in the state had, instead of waiting and making a public statement, quietly said, pick on a different group. You do this, we'll move jobs. You do this, we'll primary your opponent. Is that still, maybe I'll start there with you, Sarah Kate. Is that still a winning strategy?
Absolutely, and it's happening. I mean, their 80 did pass, but now out of 600. So a lot did die, and there was a lot of quiet diplomacy going on behind the scenes. Not enough. There needs to be more, and it needs to be consistent. And it needs to be a first action, not a second thought. And so I think what's really important as we move into this next year, or we're in it, I guess, and we're going to see, I mean, the projection is that we're going to see more than 600 anti-LGBTQ bills.
Probably by next week, from what I read from Aaron Reed.
It is unbelievable. And the thing is also that's really important for people to understand is that as soon as these bills are proposed, the damage is done. Because the narrative is that LGBTQ people are less than, that we're not valuable, that we need to be governed against, and we need to be policed in our own country. And so we need businesses more than ever to stand up and speak up. And I think it's really heartening to me to start to see in this global forum and that these conversations that people want to participate like never before. They see the threat. I mean, if we just elevate the conversation a little bit, now LGBTQ is the canary in the coal mine. We have a real issue with democracy, especially in the United States, around the world right now. And so if we're not fighting back for LGBTQ people, we're going to continue to see the erosion of democracy. And we need businesses to care deeply because that is based on you all making money. And so if we start to see that fade and move, it's going to be a lot more bigger trouble in the horizons.
Marco, you get to whisper in Julie Sweet's ear and say, this is really a moment.
There's so much to that.
Sorry,
I know she was going to go there.
I'll let you take that wherever you will. But so much of using a company's power is deciding when to speak, when not to speak. How do you make that call? Because you can't constantly be saying, we got to speak on this, we got to speak on that. There's so much pressure, and there's hundreds of bills, there's political candidates. How do you balance that for a company that's unequivocal about wanting to do the right thing, but also has business priorities, other social priorities? How can other CEOs and other people who can whisper in the ears of their CEOs, how can you use that power effectively?
Yeah, and I don't have to whisper into Julie's ears because she's very, very, she's an unbelievable advocate for our community, but also in general for inclusion, diversity. So first of all, let me share with you what inspires me personally. I have two little kids, they're 13 now, but we were walking in the New York Pride Parade about 3 years ago with the little guys. They were 10 at that time, my husband and I, and for those of you who have walked in the parade, it takes 6 hours to get going. So it was very hard to get them, motivated, and there was no apple juice to be bought. And we learned a lot. It was my first time too. But we walked behind a group that had T-shirts on that says LGBTQ business is good business. And I looked at those folks for 5 hours, and I reflected for 5 hours. As me in my position, I didn't have the job yet that I have now, but what I needed to personally do to make that a reality. And we mentioned it many times, but that summarizes a lot to me. It is just good things to do, and we saw the statistics. Dominic, the research is great. Your allyship research with the 6 or 5 components, I really like it. How do you balance this? I think it has to just be who we are, what we do. So before I had the role as a chief of staff for Julie, I was a client account lead, meaning I'm looking after the business of our services, technology, and other services for our clients. And I made it a point, and Kelly, you may be aware, but I worked with 2 companies, and in both cases, I said, who is your D&I officer? She or they met them. It's an easy meeting to get. And I always said, then I pivoted to, and as a leader, I think there's one thing we need to do. We just need to be telling our stories. We need to be open about ourselves. We need to open up with conversations. Many people don't know how to engage. I mean, this is the traditional one when we came out, right? Who do you talk to? What do you do? And I asked them, are you participating in the Equality Index? 2 companies I actually helped to build a business case, why it would be good to work with HRC, with GLAAD. We did something similar. So that is a starting point to even do that, but we need to lead there as an Accenture and others. And then the other thing that I think business leaders need to do, and that's what I'm constantly thinking about when I walk down the promenade last night as well, who can I meet, who can I make a deal with? And I'm not talking about a business deal, I'm talking about what do we do together? So I'll give you an example. We have done a health equity speaker series with CVS Health. It's public out there, it's on my LinkedIn. And we came together and said, how do we amplify the voice between Accenture and CVS Health for our LGBTQ+ community? We did panels, speaker series around vaccination, around mental health in the community. We put it out on LinkedIn. We presented it out in Equal together. So we brought the community together. We had so many companies coming to us. We want to be part of that thing. We want to be part of that community. Can we do something together? So I think business leaders, and many of us need to just lean in and go to the other businesses and pull them in and do something. We need to action. And I think this action, but it has to be part of what we do every day. It's not a special program that sits out there.
And I actually want to go to Dominic because it's comparatively easy to show those demographics, show the trends of the next generation. Kelly, you mentioned this as well. Look, it's a quarter of people. It's comparatively easy to make the business case for LGBTQ inclusion. What I do think is harder, and I'm curious, I'm sure you get this pushback, I'm sure all of you, and I welcome anyone to jump in on this after Dominic, how do you make the case that it's important to use your political capital on this? That it's important to take a risk, take a stand, because companies say, look, I have a fiduciary duty to shareholders. If I take this stand and it results in lower business, I'm not doing it. If I take this political stand, and I hear that, behind closed doors, I hear that from companies that have perfect scores on the Equality Index. I hear that from the companies that are our strongest allies in many ways that still are like, we can't speak out politically. How do you advise companies, Dominic?
So firstly, I think you're absolutely right. I think the businesses we work with, that probably is the area where they're at the beginning of their journey and where they're feeling things through sometimes. And I think Kelly mentioned this in her presentation. But it's becoming a really essential part, I think, of LGBTQ advocacy, corporate advocacy, is being able to take a public position or a private position. I mean, a lot of the businesses we work with do really fantastic behind-the-scenes advocacies with governments all over the world. But I think that there was a time, certainly, when businesses were expected to absolutely look after their employees, because that's what businesses do, that's within our business. Speaking out felt like, well, is this within our role? And I think more and more it's becoming an essential part of their role, actually. And an example would be, we recently did an amicus brief in East Africa. And we put together the brief, and we got together these healthcare organizations that said, we want to sign this brief, and we want to do it on the basis of HIV and AIDS, which we know a lot about. So they signed the brief. They said they were going forward. They were acting completely within their sphere of expertise, if you like. And I think there's something in that, you know, like, we're not asking organizations to step wildly into something they know nothing about. You know, Toni Morrison said, do what you can from where you are. And I always think about that. And I think that if businesses, if we as individuals do what we can from where we are, we will beat this.
And that leads me right back to you, Alex, because I feel like you guys are a model of that. Like, it is your business, you have that opportunity, but I'm sure you too have to balance. Like, when don't you speak out? When do you speak out? Particularly when there's a political cost.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even though we are an HIV company, we're as woke as it gets, and I mean that with a badge of honor, not the way it's used as a derogatory term in right-wing media. There are still, I find myself in debates internally, and sometimes, and I understand that sometimes it's our government affairs colleagues where they have to work with Republicans in Washington, and they're worried about what the impact will be there. Now, I love the fact that, you know, LGBTQ work is good for business, because I think the worst thing we could do internally is almost position this work as it's an altruistic thing we have to do. Of course it is. It's the right thing to do. It should be in line with our values. But my argument always with those debates, and I win most of them, by the way, so far, is from a business perspective, to put aside what's the right thing to do, okay? From a business perspective, if we piss off the LGBTQ community, the impact to our business will be 10 times worse than if we annoy Ted Cruz in the US. And by the way, we're talking about US examples, but it's the same thing. You know, Hungary here on our doorstep here in Davos. So the argument needs to be very clear from a business perspective and a corporate citizenship perspective. And the other thing, one thing, we need to make sure that we have the real CEO backing. It sounds like you definitely do. I feel like I do. The one advice I would say, if you're an in-house person, is get the debates done now versus when there is a big crisis and the need to be public. So what we've done is I've actually, we used it as a guideline on what are we going to speak out and what are we not going to speak out as a topic.
Good advice.
Yeah, because we are having those debates before, I don't know, knock on woods, hopefully not, but if there is another Orlando shooting type event, or if there is a huge anti-LGBTQ federal level legislation that passes, you don't want to have those debates then, because then you'll be late in speaking up if you do end up speaking up. So my only advice is have the debates now and bring in the experts. Bring Dominic, Kelly, Sarah Kate, put them in front of your executives before you actually the rubber hits the road.
That's really good advice. Kelly, how do you wrestle with this? And I'm sure it must be maddening when you have this company that's got 100, and I saw that list very briefly in the slide of like companies that are getting 100, but you know, I heard a CEO of a major company, I might not out them right now, we'll see, that was basically making a speech in Davos, you know, gave a TV interview, making the case why Trump wouldn't be so bad. You know, what is it like when you have a company that has 100 score and yet they're not using their political capital? Do you have to add what they do? Like, how do we incorporate not just what a company does in their policies, but what they do with their donations? We're still seeing companies with 100 scores, companies that are big allies to GLAAD and Sarah Kate's organization, still put their money in places that are doing real harm to the community.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about allyship as an ongoing piece of work. It's not something that you are one day. It's not something that you are or you are not. It is something that has to happen in your practices and who you are every single day. And I think the opportunity that we have, especially the Human Rights Campaign, is to partner with businesses. I'm very clear that if you look back at the history of our movement, one of the single defining things about it has been to increase visibility, especially in the places that we work. If we can be out and open about who we are, it fundamentally transforms the world and communities. We can't lose that strength. So when there are missteps, what we want to do is have those conversations. How did we arrive here? What's the boogeyman on the other side of that door that you're afraid of? Let's talk it through and let's figure out ways to get better and to get right, because we know that it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the best thing to do for your businesses. And over again, I think that we are continuing to see businesses step up, and when they make missteps, help to get on the right side with our community. And I just want to say, when we go back to thinking about the context that we're in right now, I do want to underscore that as bad as things are from a legislative and political environment in the United States, we have year after year defeated 90% of the bad bills coming at our community, 90% of them. And that has been in large part due to our business and corporate partnerships. In fact, if I look back just a couple of weeks ago to Ohio as a great example, you saw a Republican governor veto a bill coming out of a Republican legislature because it was undermining the rights of parents and families and trans people in the state of Ohio. Now, of course, the way the rest of that story plays out, his veto was overridden by the legislature. That did happen, but I think what it shows is there is opportunity. There is softening. And when I think about what is possible with this next generation, 1 in 4 of Generation Z, the consumer power, the pure number and power of our community, we have to be united in this. And we have to make folks understand that the risk of not doing something is greater than the risk of standing with the community.
And the other thing that lesson pointed out is the importance of how you frame the narrative. That there is actually a conservative case against a lot of these anti-trans bills, a lot of the anti-reproductive freedom bills, that you're passing laws that are standing between a person and their doctor. You're standing between a parent and a child. You're not mandating somebody get gender-affirming care. You're giving them the option. Sarah Kate, you're really good at helping reframe these narratives. How have you learned, and is it starting to resonate, this notion that they've gone so far with these bills that they're actually going against a lot of the conservative principles?
Absolutely. So I have several answers to that question because there's a lot packed into that. And I'll start with also a positive thing, sort of along the lines of Kelly, which is 7 years ago, 8 years ago, people didn't even know the word transgender, and that there were transgender people in our society.
I did, but go on.
I did too. But if you're talking about mass general population, and so that just shows you that the visibility that we've had for the trans community, whether it be on TV or in the workplace, has created a world with trans people being able to live their lives. That has, of course, created a tremendous backlash. The biggest part of the backlash, if you ask me, is not being educated and not knowing trans people. And so I love quoting this stat because I think it really drives it home. 30% of Americans say they know a trans person. More Americans report seeing a ghost. So that vacuum of 70% of Americans right now not knowing trans people is being filled with political rhetoric. And so what we're doing on that narrative is really fighting back and testing messages, because there's a few things that work. One is everybody believes in bodily autonomy and that medical decisions should be made privately and personally within families, for women, for their own bodies. It's all interconnected and interrelated. And then the second piece of that is that everybody believes that people should live their lives and be respected and left alone so that they could live the life that they love. And so those two types of messages We actually have out now in the 9 sort of big states that we're seeing that could move the election in the United States, not to move the election, to inoculate the lies and the misinformation. And we've targeted women with school-aged children because they are the biggest targets right now, whether it be, you know, kids on the sports, trans youth, and trying to just play a sport. I mean, the kids just want to kick a soccer ball, for crying out loud. And it's been made into the Olympics of you know.
Even the Olympics is shocked that they're
Even
like, that's
the
not what we're
election
talking about.
actually has it figured out, right? Like, and elite sports has had this figured out for a very long time. And if you're playing soccer on at 1, you're all running against the same ball in the same direction.
They can bunch up whether
Yeah.
they're trans or not.
Exactly. and the other thing is just the humanity side of this. We know, I'm a parent, I have 14-year-old twins, we'll chat, because a lot's on the horizon there. And, you know, my wife and I always talk about how sports saves lives for kids, right? And especially kids who might not feel like they fit in. And now we're removing that from the handful of kids who really need it. So messages that appeal to people, to their heartstrings, are the ones that work the best.
So we're almost out of time, and I've pushed you all really hard because I do believe the moment demands it. We need more, and we need strategies that allow companies to go further beyond their comfort zone. But I do want to end on a moment of hope. A lot of parents on this panel. I have an 11-year-old. I want to ask what gives you hope, each of you. For me, it's the next generation. I'm so blessed to know this amazing next generation of trans and non-binary kids. They're amazing. I can't wait till they're running the world. I want to start, maybe, Dominic, what gives you hope?
You know, I used to run an LGBT young people's organization before Open for Business, and I remember meeting a trans boy that was 15 or 16, and we had a school speaker program at the time where they would go and speak in schools. And he said to me, I don't know if my story is a good story to tell. And I said, why not? And he said, it's been fine. I grew up, I came out, I've got a good group of friends, I've got a good family. And I said, please go and tell that story. And I think we're hearing those stories more and more of LGBTQ people who actually have this wonderful experience growing up. And that was probably not true when many of us were at school. So things are heading in the right direction, sort of. And of course, it's the job of the people on this panel and the job of the people in the audience, the job of people watching this everywhere, to make sure we stay on that path and to make sure we do right by those young people. Because it's not fair, actually, that the weight of responsibility for their lives rests solely on them.
Other things that give people hope?
For me, and I feel really privileged because in my role, I get to work with community leaders and a lot of LGBTQ leaders, and that's what gives me hope. I'll just give you one example, like you were very specific. There is a trans man in Georgia, not the state, Eastern Europe, Georgia, and he's called Bill, and he's working on policy and advising the government in Georgia. You can imagine being trans in Georgia is not easy. And he's managed through sheer resilience and I don't know what drives him to actually pass some really positive legislation for the trans community in Georgia. And to me, it's those stories and those superheroes that give me hope. And I feel really lucky that I get to work and actually support them.
Amazing. Other moments of hope?
Yeah, you know, so I'm married, and we have my wife and I, we have a 2.5-year-old son. So I'm curious about what's to come. But our whole life isn't possible before this very moment. You know, I grew up Black and queer in the Midwest of the United States. My wife is a first-generation kid of Indian ancestry from Kerala. And we had our kid by our own design. It just was not possible 10 years ago for my life to even exist. So I'm inspired by how far we've come. And I'm also reminded that, look, the same horrific things they're saying about trans people today, they said about lesbian, gay, and bi people 20 years ago, and we have seen tremendous progress. I mean, marriage is now the law of the land in the United States, and that just happened last year, or 2 years ago. This is a moment where we have to make sure that 20 years from now, we have that sort of exponential progress for trans lives, but it requires us to take urgent action right now. And I think that we can.
Marco?
I had a moment to think about it, take a little different direction on this one. It's human decency and love. The reason why I say this is because people love to buy and be with people they like and trust. And if we're engaging and having a conversation, getting to know each other and putting a business lens on, they listen to you. We got to tell the stories. We got to continue to talk. The next generation is much more outspoken than my generation has ever been in business. Equip them with the right tools. You guys doing amazing work, the information, but engage and trust and communicate. So I think that has given me hope because that inspires me every time when I talk to somebody and open a dialogue and I learn something. And one last point I want to make, I did not know about the Florida ban. I have a vacation place there. And that is even inspiring me more to go because I can educate people I know because they might not even be aware and I can help change all of that one.
Agreed.
Sarah Kate, you got an Emmy this week, so you get the first word and the last word.
I would say the conversations that I'm having here in Davos with business leaders are really inspiring. People want to step up. They see the urgency, they see the need, and they understand the power and the platform that they have to create change.
Well, I want to thank all those who tuned in to watch this panel, all those in the room, and especially all the folks on this stage, not just for what they said today, but for the work they do all year long. Thank you.
Back to you.
Thank you.
Cause I